I had one of the most amazing experiences at Kumiko in Chicago a few years ago, and I went there. I was up there for the restaurant show, and I went into the restaurant and I was there by myself, and I sat at the bar, and we were having omakase, and I was sort of at the end, and everybody's chopsticks were set up on the right. And I'm ambidextrous, so sometimes I'll use my right hand, and sometimes I'll use my left hand. But my chopsticks were set up on the right, so I was picking it up with my left hand, and I was eating the food, and then I would, with my left hand, and then reset it down on the right. Second course comes up, everything gets reset. They reset me on the left. Nobody says anything. Nobody makes a thing of it. They just notice. And I felt tremendous love in that singular moment that they saw me and acted. Love is active. You can talk about it, you can think it, but if you don't do something about it, nobody can necessarily really feel it. In that moment, they saw me and they moved it, and I felt love.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. At the ripe age of 38, I left my former career behind and joined the hospitality industry. Since then, I've been on a rapid journey of learning, meeting all sorts of great people, and this podcast is my chance to bring you along with me, whether I'm interviewing somebody that works in the industry, another enthusiast, or occasionally stepping back to share what I'm working on or my thoughts. I'm so glad you're here, and so with that aside, let's get into today's episode. What's happening, everybody? Welcome back for another episode of the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I am Chris LeBeau. Again, I say this often. Today, I've got a really great conversation for you. And the wonderful part is like you start having a podcast for a minute and people start reaching out. And however many weeks or months ago it was, I got an email from someone asking if I wanted to interview Daniel Singer, who runs the garnish company, Filthy Foods. Now first, the word filthy, that's a heck of a memorable name right there. And I was like, filthy? I was like, what do I think about this? And a question I sometimes ask myself, and the answer is almost always yes, is can I find a way to get excited about garnishes? And so I did my research on Daniel, and right around the time that we were preparing to meet up at Tales of the Cocktail, so this was recorded in New Orleans several months ago, Daniel had just released a campaign also called Love is in the Details. And so you'll hear that come up multiple times during that. So, and Daniel will kind of go into depth on it. But what is the first part that's very edifying about this conversation is that I was kind of, at the outset, I was not all that interested, but I was like, I'm going to find a way to become interested in this. And beyond getting into wonderful depth about garnishes and mixes, talking to Daniel was in a way also very therapeutic and interesting for me, being an entrepreneur of many, many years now. I think he's been at Filthy for about 15 years. His outlook about what it takes to be an entrepreneur and what deserves our time and energy and what we need to just forget about hit me very hard, even right during the middle of our interview. And as I was re-listening to it, getting ready for this, I was just like, it's almost like talk therapy. So anyways, a great way to think about Filthy Foods in a way is the analogy that a lot of people are now more comfortable with something like Fever Tree. For a long time, we were just using whatever tonic water. And then Fever Tree started to say, hey, if 60% or whatever of a gin and tonic is tonic, shouldn't we pay attention to what's in the tonic that we're using? And Daniel is a big martini guy. And so one of the things he became obsessed about, and Filthy for him, as you'll hear, is all about, filthy is when you jump all the way into something. You get filthy in terms of like sweating all the small stuff. He wanted to better understand olives because he loves them, and he felt like olives were selling martinis short. And so you're going to get to hear about this, like about the incredible depth of olives that are out there and how commoditized the field is. And so this is the cool part about his work. For example, another thing, and I was very excited about this, that while I can be a fan, some of the cherries out on the market, like the Luxardo cherries, the beloved Luxardo cherries, Daniel is very quick to say, if you love whatever you love, please keep on loving it. But he's quick to point out that a cherry like this, why it might not be the perfect, like a Luxardo cherry, might not actually be the perfect complement to something like a Manhattan. They're luscious, they're wonderful, but what does a Manhattan actually want from its cherry? And so these are some of the things we get into as well. But we also talk about beautiful things like in hospitality, it's easier to notice and do the broad stroke things, but the real love to Daniel's campaign with bartenders, and there's going to be a link to a number of videos I highly recommend. Chase this campaign all the way to the end. It's worth it. But he says, beyond the broad strokes, the real love is in the details, obviously, in the fine lines. You'll also hear him talk about that in a way that hospitality really is not a job. You can certainly do it, but it really is more of a vocation. It's a calling. You are called to want to take care of other people because that's how you show love. The final thing that I wanted to close out with for this conversation, this is a great one, because I think this sums it up so well in terms of thinking about paying more, because you will pay more for Daniel's cherries or olives or his syrups, his brines, but we are, I think, at a point in time where we are more comfortable right now paying good money for mezcal, tequila, gin, whatever, for good quality spirits. But when it comes to mixtures or even garnishes, Daniel says towards the end of our conversation is, give yourself what you think you deserve. And I think it's interesting where as opposed to going out and buying another bottle of whiskey, going out and buying another gin, whatever, to spend a little bit more money on your vermouth, your olive brine, your olives, your cherries, is really interesting in terms of how about we follow through on this drink all the way until the end. You will find links to Filthy and Daniel in the show notes, but Filthy Food is where you will find them online. But this is a really wonderful conversation. I can't say thank you to Daniel enough for being just an absolute charming, hilarious person to talk to. Enjoy.
There are always going to be heritage brands, right? There are going to be brands that are multi-generational. There's going to be brands that are, passed down from one family member to another. There is heritage, and then there is rebellion. There is David Bowie's New Americans, right? So in a way, the market, as I said to you, that ultimately decides. Some people like heritage brands, and some people like rock and roll. It's a totally different vibe. You feel it innately. From a quality standpoint, we are obsessed with all of those things. We do things in a very, very unique way. At the same time, people either feel it or they don't. I read this thing the other day, and it said, a bumblebee can't teach a fly that honey tastes better than shit. There are bumblebees, yes, and there are flies.
Yes.
And you like what you like.
And flavor is relative, yes.
Exactly.
It
exactly.
Is.
You know what I mean? So basically, I think I find a huge amount of joy when I see people using Filthy, because I feel like they care about their guest. They've discovered us however they've discovered us, and they really care about the details. And I want them to think of us as their partner in that experience, in making their drinks better. I don't know if there's anybody that thinks about the stuff in the way that we do from a partnership standpoint. You're right, there are companies that have a particular SKU or in a particular space or do whatever they do. But from a garnish standpoint, I know that's where we've been most conscious of making sure that all areas of the bar within that space that we covered, and they know that we are so maniacal about quality that we that we've got them and they don't have to worry.
And
I think we've just scaled simply like that, from me delivering out the back of my wife's car for all of those years and my brother going around New York with backpacks, all the way to now. The quality is always the same. It's as good as it can possibly be, and it will always be that way. You can't have a company called Filthy and it not be beautiful and perfect, because there's no irony in that. It has to be.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you do a decent job teasing this out. But yeah, I remember, when I first bumped into you guys, I was like, speaking of like memorable naming, you hear a company like Filthy and you go like, well, I know what that word means right there. That's and so for you, it was Filthy, if I understand, feels like this extension of, I love the actor and spokesperson Mike Rowe, and he talks about getting dirty a little bit, but for you, like Filthy is like we're all the way in on this process right here.
Absolutely. So in England, it's sort of pissing down all the time, right? It's constantly raining. Mark's only 10 months younger than me, and then there were twins 2.5 years later, so there was 4 of us under 4. So Mark and I were always outside playing, just getting covered in mud and just being so happy. And my mum was always like, look at you, you're bloody filthy, we're just about to go out and you're bloody filthy. So for us, that's how we look at life. Like, don't dip your toe in. Go all in on everything, because it's where the joy is. So every day I wake up just constantly full of piss and vinegar to try to get the most out of every moment and every exchange, because that is the speed that I operate at, and I don't want to operate at another speed. I don't want to phone it in. I don't want to have inauthentic exchanges, because we got a flyby. That's some jets. That's amazing.
That's right, everybody. That's right.
This is America. I love America. Honestly, I love America. And so for me, I have one speed, and now I've found a vehicle of which I get to be completely obsessed about something and committed to something fully. And so I'm living my most filthy life. So the mad thing is, there are going to be people, like I said, with the other example, that get it straight away. They can feel what it is to be filthy, and they want to be filthy, and they celebrate it, and they're filthy for life. And there are other people that go, oh, filthy, that sounds a bit and that's okay. It's a long journey, and language is changing all of the time. I love language, but it's the evolution of language means that what filthy meant a one period of time, it doesn't mean that anymore, and it will continue to evolve and continue to change. And I'll tell you a funny story, actually. My dad used to be in business in England, and there was this guy called Nigel, who was an abominable human being for all accounts. He was like really awful. And whenever he wasn't in the room, people would say, oh, that's Nigel, he's really nasty. And they called him Nasty Nigel. And
Nasty
he didn't,
Nigel.
Nasty Nigel. And he didn't know about it. And people stopped giving him business because he was so horrible. He was awful human. And then all of a sudden, somebody told him once, in a conversation while he was asking why he wasn't getting their business anymore, he said, they said, because you're so nasty, Nigel, you're just such a horrible human being. We call you Nasty Nigel. So he started to print Nasty Nigel on his card. And slowly but surely, he started to get his business back, and it became a bit of a joke, right?
Yeah.
So when we were starting Filthy, beyond, what my mum always used to call us as we were thinking about it, we didn't have any money, and we were building the business out, thinking about how we were going to get out there. And we were like, oh, why don't we just call it Filthy, and it would be memorable. And I went from, oh, that's Daniel from Filthy, to being Filthy Daniel. And it just really stuck. And I think it's important for anybody out there listening, if you're building a brand or trying to become part of a community, you have to bring the right energy, and you have to be memorable. There's just so much competition. There's so many things that people could engage in. So I think being called Filthy at the beginning was maybe a bit strange for people, but I think over time they've really embraced it, and it's kind of memorable to people.
I was interested too. One of the things I mean, it can exist in the spirits world, but it can exist anywhere, is I find it interesting when people, either I've learned or a producer goes, oh, like this is a commodity flavor. This is benign, not interesting. And like, what would happen if we made this taste better? So what I was interested in is olives, I mean, as somebody who works in them, I feel like they are one of the most polarizing foods. People are either in or out on them, and I love olives. And I know that there would be calibers, but what was it in terms of, did you have and I know you were also very quick to kind of talk about that dyslexia has shaped part of your life. So I don't know I don't know if this fits in, but where was the trigger for you when suddenly you started realizing that the olives that were being served weren't good quality? So I guess I'm curious if there was a culinary background, or what led you to kind of even take note of that in the first place?
Yeah, I'm a very curious human. Dyslexia impacts every part of my life. So I think, I know as a dyslexic human, the way my brain works is I tend to fixate on the spaces between all the noise. So rather than there being all the big broad strokes that are happening, it's not that I don't process them, I do, but I look at the tiny little details in things. And so I was going into bars and restaurants, and people were making an incredible effort to give better quality cocktails, right? It had followed the sort of chef scene where value here in the States used to be big plates, and then it came smaller plates, better quality, and so people became much more conscious in cocktails about every ingredient that was going into it. You start to see fresh herbs on the bar, fresh juices behind the bar. People were taking a lot of pride in it. They were educating themselves on it. This sort of mixology movement happened. And I would sit in these bars and restaurants and enjoy cocktails, and then see everybody handle this giant gallon of olives in rancid brine, and nobody took any pride in it. And so for me, I started to think, why is this so horrific? And then why is it fucking up my martini, which I love, right? I love martinis. And everybody wanted to do something better, but there just wasn't anything available. And you can talk about, just to understand it, olive is the most highly commoditized fruit in the world, right? 8 million olive trees, 6 continents, thousands and thousands of families. Some have hundreds of thousands of acres, others just tend their great-grandfather's trees. The oldest olive tree we looked at was 4,000 years old, right? So and it still produces fruit. So you have this incredible landscape, but 90% of the world's olives go into olive oil. The other 10% is highly commoditized. So commoditizing by its nature is you have to process it really quickly so that you can sell it for as cheaply as possible. So everybody was using chemicals in the fermentation process. So I'm sitting there in bars and restaurants and watching all of this beautiful things happening with fresh herbs and fresh juices, and then this other thing. And for me, it just started to really bother me, because I really deeply care about people, and I would watch people sit and have drinks, and they would be given something that I just felt was completely unacceptable, and I just thought, why is this so horrible? And I started to sort of look at it, and it's this massive market, highly commoditized, big gallons. Bars wouldn't go through half a jar before it went rancid. If they were making somebody a martini on a Monday, they'd pour olive brine out of the jar, and it would taste completely different on the Friday. When quality is about, or guest experience should be about, consistency and quality. If you can't create consistency and quality, then that's where opportunity lives, because great brands are consistently quality driven.
Sure.
Right? So my brother was coming back from Iraq. He was a documentarian as part of a force recon unit, and I just sort of pitched him the idea of, he was transitioning from being on the front line, and I said, why don't you come and look at olives with me? And we thought it was going to take us 3 or 4 months, but there are 700 varieties of cultivatable olives on the planet, and if we weren't the type of human beings we were, we probably walked around the olive bar at Whole Foods, picked one and got somebody else to put a label on it. We would have stopped at 60 varieties instead of 230 varieties. But we just kept exploring, and we would meet a family that said, oh, you've got to go and meet this other family, or you've got to go and see this tree, or you've got to go to this area. And then what we discovered was, because the olive is the same family as a peach or a plum, single stone fruit, surrounded by flesh. It's the drupe family. It's one of the only fruit in that family that you can't eat directly from a tree. It doesn't ripen on the tree, apart from one island in West Greece, which is called Athios. So otherwise they're like hard little stones, so you have to cure them. Everybody cures them using chemicals, sodium hydroxide. So in 4 days it would change the makeup of the fruit, but it would also strip it of everything you love about olive oil. It would thicken the skin. It would shut down all the pores of the fruit. So you would have to add all this salt and oil back into it afterwards to reintroduce flavour and texture. So when you would take these oily, salty salad olives that were chemically cured and you put them in a beautiful martini, you'd always get that slick on top. And we were like, that doesn't look satisfying at all. So and so everybody was going towards twists, right? Because olives were so inconsistent, or they would just mess it up. All the people would talk about gins and all these beautiful botanicals, and then you put this sort of, disgusting thing on top of it, right? And why? There's just no love in it.
Yeah.
So we ended up we naturally cure all of the olives for 4 months just with salt and water instead of 4 days with chemicals. And so, to your point, they are polarizing, but what we will find is, I always say to people say, I don't like olives, and I say, but do you like olive oil? And they're like, yeah, I love olive oil. And I say, try it, and they go, no, I don't really like olives. And I go, okay, but go and be brave, you can always spit it out if you don't like it. And they try it, and they go, this is really good. This doesn't taste like an olive. And I always say, this is what an olive is supposed to taste like.
Right. This isn't this is actually what an olive tastes like. Yeah. We're just used to tasting like
highly commoditized fruit. So that's how it started. I think anybody building a business, you have to determine at the beginning, what does success look like?
Yeah.
Do you want to be good locally, regionally, nationally, or globally?
Sure.
And then can you scale, spend your money growing without somebody trying to kill you in another market? So you can spend your money growing and not fighting. So it was about finding categories and doing things where there wasn't a lot of competition, where we could really add value. Yeah. And the brand, as you know, was really adopted by the bartending community.
So I remember kind of as I was getting ready, so this with all those varieties of olives, a 2-year pilgrimage into olives. How did you begin that process of discerning down to arrive at what you at present use? Because I'm sure you met many that were wonderful. But how did you kind of make that decision?
So again, I think scale is so interesting. I meet a lot of young entrepreneurs or people that are starting out in business, and they have dreams of being global brands, but maybe where they're sourcing stuff from gives them a restriction on how fast or how big they can become, because the source doesn't provide enough raw material to ultimately get you to where you need to get to. So there was always a consideration around scaling, but at the same time, to your point, was a family in 2008 going to naturally cure olives when we were only going to do 4 barrels? So then it's really about finding partners, people that really understand early on what you're trying to do and never see you as a small company. They may see you as a young company, but they don't see you as small. And they go, okay, we'll take a shot on you. We will try naturally curing. We think you're insane, because to your point, there's a whole grading system for olives. And there is nobody that does olive. We are completely off that scale. We salt all of the olives. Think of the context. Context is always really important. You're not burying our olives in a salad or on a pizza, right? It's one, perhaps, that sits on top of a martini, which is gorgeous, or on a Bloody Mary, and it's so exposed that if it's not perfect, it's going to disappoint. So the journey really for us was, can we find a region that we could really scale in, because the ambition was always to be a global brand? Can we find a family that was kind enough to come on the journey with us when we weren't big enough to have any leverage or justify them taking a shot? So it's always about kindness and finding kind people. And then it was about, what does success look like? And we just built it 1 bar at a time. And every time we got a yes, we could continue, And I think, I know for certainty, being an entrepreneur is about your own personal pain threshold, and then about the pain threshold of the people that love you. And even if you're insane and you have a very high pain tolerance, it's really about the people around you loving you enough to allow you to be you, and know that if you weren't being you, then you would not be happy, and supporting you in that, no matter whether you're eating beans out of a tin or pasta for 6 months. That's part of it. That's part of the journey. That's part of the joy of it. It's leaning into all of that.
Yeah.
So we always felt we'd be a global brand, but I heard this thing recently which I thought was so brilliant, which was that Usain Bolt trained for 4 years to run for 9 seconds. And that everybody thinks if it doesn't happen within 2 months, that like they don't know what's going on. And we were talking about the Loves in the Details project, what we did Monday night. That took 15 years for those 2 hours.
Sure.
It took 15 years for that. So I think in a way, it's really about patience and kindness and just finding joy in all of it. Because what else is there really?
Without it being, anyways, as a fellow entrepreneur, the pain tolerance threshold is so real in terms of the moments when, because you've been at this for longer than me, and the moments when you're like, but I've worked hard enough already. Like, when is my payoff coming? And it's like, I don't know. Why don't you show up for work tomorrow, and we'll see if it's tomorrow. And like but there are days when the pain or the frustration, whatever, it's just like, but
it is pain though. I will say to you, I don't lean in on the negative because it's such a waste of energy. And as an entrepreneur, you need every single ounce of it. So anything that is negative or is going to diminish you is a total waste, and you should reject it fully. And I think of it like a battery, right? There's negatives and there's positives. So the bigger the negative, the more I rebel against that and force myself into the positive. I'm a big believer that happiness is a little bit like a rainbow, like light has to hit the water at a certain angle and then suddenly everyone's happy. And I just don't subscribe to that. I subscribe to positivity. Every situation I have, every encounter I have, every moment I have, I choose positive, and then I'm not reliant on all of these things happening at the same time. I can always choose positive. And it is hard when you feel the pressure of it, but you also have to be a bit nuts to really just lean into that, to embrace it, because it makes you should feel alive from it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
It's very important that.
So while I have other garnish questions, since it's come up, because it was...
Go for it, mate. We'll
absolutely.
go all over the place.
Yeah, hell yeah. To your point of like 15 years to get to whatever this was on Monday. So so on Monday you had the launch of your, Love is in the Details campaign. And speaking of a handful of videos where I either was like, pounding my fist on the table, or once or twice I was like, am I going to cry watching this short right now? Like, so obviously to the point of like filthy, I think of it maybe a little bit to your martini aspect. And while you're even looking at it at a more granular level, it's like, with cocktails in general, it's like, oh, people are like, I love a martini and I love Bombay gin. And vermouth is kind of like, for so long has been like, and whatever the fuck vermouth, as opposed to like, oh, like what's the quality of that, right? The quality of the ice. And like, you don't want to fuck up the end game with like the garnish. So clearly it's a nice extension, but the Love is in the Details campaign is clearly just so adjacent. And the bartenders are who your company has kind of worked to endear itself to and are your spokesperson. But how did the actual campaign itself as an idea come to fruition?
I feel very fortunate to be part of this community on a global scale. There's people from all over the world that I've had the privilege of getting to spend time with and call friends. So there was an innate shift that was happening during the pandemic, where the hospitality industry was really suffering, because bars and restaurants and hotels and cruise ships and airlines and everywhere was sort of closed. So I think why I resonate so much with the community is they show love through service. That's their love language, taking care of people. And that's where I sit. I'm really bad at receiving gifts, but I love taking care of people. Right? I'm so much better at that. So I just felt that there was a shift happening where all of these people that really give out love should just feel loved. And I also was conscious that at Tales, which is, this is my 14th year, I missed a couple. A dear friend of mine passed, a gentleman called John Lemaire, who was a wonderful, wonderful human and a massive advocate and a friend. So I just couldn't come. I just couldn't be around everybody, right? And but I felt like, okay, this was the first Tales. Last year was the first Tales really back. How do I let everybody know that I love them and that I see them? And the other part of it was, how do I amplify how incredible they are to hospitality people all over the world, so they felt part of something bigger when it was tough, and that they could take a little nugget from these incredible people and maybe inform their bar program or give their guests a better experience. So I thought, nobody's really celebrating these people that should really be celebrated, that dedicate their whole life to making sure you're okay.
Yeah.
So I had this idea, and I've contacted my friend Josh Wagner, and who you may recognise from the Don't Postpone Joy video, and a gentleman called Alex Fazan, who's a dear friend who owns Zaddy. And we sat down, and I said, I have a vision for a particular piece where I want to show people that they're loved, and that hospitality people should be seen because they're really taking care of you. And so we rented 2 hotel rooms and turned one into a green room and one into a studio. And I contacted 63 people that I really respect and like, and that I thought would be interesting as pairs, because, you know, it's funny, storytelling is the visual medium of storytelling. It's not without complication. So they would feel comfortable as a pair. We created it so it looked like they were sitting at a bar, and the audience was almost the perspective of the bartender. And even if somebody wasn't speaking, the audience could watch the person. It's called the everyman character, right? So while somebody was telling their story or really connecting, the audience would basically look to the person next to the storyteller to determine how they should feel about it, right? So, for example, in the Don't Postpone Joy one, I'm literally sitting there just listening to Josh, and he's telling such a beautiful story, and in a way, if the audience don't know how to feel about it, the person next to them, me in that case,
Sure.
it really just sort of lets you know how you know, in a way, the way you should look at it. So somebody could say something horrific, and the person next to them could either start crying and, you know, oh, this is sad, or they could start laughing and you go, oh, this must be funny. So I wanted to set it up where they felt comfortable, put people together who I knew either knew each other really well, or I thought they would like each other, and then we just created an environment where they could really just tell stories, and all we had to do was point the camera at amazing people, and just try to capture it, and then really protect them in the story through the animation and through the editing, to make sure that they were really celebrated, and that the right things were put out, and that they felt the intention behind the piece, which is really for them to know that they're so loved and appreciated. And over 1 million people have watched the videos all the way through at this point, and they've only been out for 10 days or something, which is incredible, really. Shows how much the world needs that sort of authenticity and love, really.
And I think that's, it very is reflective of it, because, you know, there's a lot of different, it's cool, like the different degrees of stories that come out. And so, like, you know, I can't tell you if I've seen all of them, but I've seen many of them. And yeah, there's just the different angles that people come at their thoughts on hospitality, or, you know, taking care of themselves or whatever, are very, very beautiful. And I remember, because obviously, you know, this is a big industry and people approach it all different ways, but I remember it was Amanda Gunderson's comment about, so like, I mean, what I think is interesting is, you know, being 2.5 years in, we'll say, I'm working hard to take myself less seriously about the work, and to know that at the end of the day, it's about doing something nice and delicious for yourself and someone else, as opposed to having to, like, point too much rigor. And I love that she's like, listen, don't belabor the fucking drink. She's like, you're here to help that guy get laid, and and to think about, we're here to create joy for people.
Yes, exactly.
In whatever context that is. And and let's take the drink seriously, but not take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah, I completely agree. There was a stage where the drink became really important, and people would spend a lot of time making drinks, right? As opposed to looking at the person on the other side of the bar and giving them real hospitality. And, you know, there's so many lessons in there. Colin Appiah talks about hospitality starting at the door. It starts at the door.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're even doing an event every morning. You know, we did it for the last few days, and you can feel it. Like great bartenders and people behind the bar. As soon as somebody walks into the room, way before they get to sit in the seat, way before they ask for a drink, you're sending them love. You're welcoming them into your place. And so there's so many little messages in there, and that was really the hope, that if somebody was interested, somebody in hospitality or somebody not in hospitality, what are the lessons from all of these incredible people? So it's so simple. You know, Simon Ford, right? Exactly.
His
what
video.
is hospitality? It's listening and then acting on what you've just heard,
Yep.
right? Making people feel special. It's not complicated, but the simplest things are often the hardest things to do.
Because they're so often, right? Like, I mean, as a person with obviously some level of ego who has his own damn podcast, I think it's at times like I'm hearing somebody and I'm so interested, honestly, in what they're saying that I want to jump in and like build off of it, as opposed to like shut your trap, let them finish their thought, damn it, and then you can play, because
just your brain works fast. That's all. So you're anticipating, and then you're already there, and you know.
And so at this point with the campaign, I mean, I mean, for a lot of people out there, you know, 1 million hits is like that. That's fun and like certainly shows the need for it. But is there, because either is okay, is this a static thing for Filthy, or do you have any thoughts on like, will it continue to evolve, or what will the campaign do at this point?
Well, I think first of all, you know, the 1 million hits, in a way, if 3 people had watched it, I wouldn't have given a shit. I would have felt bad that that more people didn't engage with how special these people were, and that didn't see the value in it. Like we talked about earlier, the market decides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Art, you can't worry about that. Art is about doing the piece of art, committing fully to it, and that should be enough, right? So I just wanted more people to see it, because I wanted more people to understand who all of these great people were, because I felt like they should be celebrated, and millions of people should know who they are, because they're very special. But the art was the piece that we created, and now we have no control of what happens to it afterwards. So in its piece, as a piece, all of those people felt tremendous love, whether it was in the room when they went in there, whether it was the little gift box they got afterwards, whether it's the heart on the wall outside the Alibi, whether it's the lenticular prints, whether it's the postcards that they could write to bartenders all around the world, letting them know that they're loved.
The postcards were a great touch, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think we just try to think of as much stuff as we can, and then jump, right? You can prepare as much as you can, then you just got to let it all go. You can't worry about it afterwards, right? But the piece itself was enough, because they all felt loved, which was really the intention of it. Yeah. And now if other people find value in it, and they share it, and they feel good about it, then that's brilliant. But it's already a success for me. And
I think, you know, I was having this conversation, and, you know, we're all part of our own trajectories and lives, and we can't make too much of like status or whatever. But it's interesting to me, you know, when I think of many of the people in the campaign, you know, you were certainly able to bring in a lot of very renowned people in our industry for that. And people that I don't know in some cases, but people that I look up to. And while I could just reach out directly to Julia Momose, I was like, but I mean, reading the introduction of her book, it just, it hits. It's like, to be able to like write her a note casually while I'm drinking a Bloody Mary at the bar, which was honestly was phenomenal.
Oh, so, thank you.
But like to be able to like write her a quick note, and shove it in that mailbox. So somebody was like, "What do I do with this?" I was like, "Put it in the mailbox, duh."
Yeah, and we'll send it out for you.
But that was it was a very nice.
I had one of the most amazing experiences at Kumiko in Chicago a few years ago, and I went there. I was up there for the restaurant show. And I went into the restaurant, and I was there by myself, and I sat at the bar, and we were having omakase, and I was sort of at the end, and everybody's chopsticks were set up on the right. And I'm ambidextrous, so sometimes I'll use my right hand, and sometimes I'll use my left hand. but my chopsticks were set up on the right, so I was picking it up with my left hand, and I was eating the food, and then I would, with my left hand, and then reset it down on the right. Second course comes up, everything gets reset. They reset me on the left. Nobody says anything.
Yep.
Nobody makes a thing of it.
Yep.
They just notice.
Yep.
And I felt tremendous love in that singular moment.
Yep.
That they saw me and acted. Love is active.
Yep.
You can talk about it, you can think it, but if you don't do something about it, nobody can necessarily really feel it. In that moment, they saw me and they moved it, and I felt love. And that is hospitality.
100%. Or like it comes up in, and I read it in Julia's book, but I think it came up in Masa's discussion, like, the whole oftentimes Japanese act of like, oh, guest gets up, like put the damn drink in the freezer.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's just these little things that do take time away from you're in service, you're getting, but like those are the things that I love in a world where there are, people talk about like, do 5 stars really mean anything anymore, like online, because everybody just hand them out like candy.
Yeah.
But that's how you create something where on a scale of 5 stars, suddenly you're at 6.
Yes.
That people go, I just didn't even know that was possible.
No, exactly.
And it's not the big thing.
No.
It is to where your ethos.
Yeah.
It is these little things where suddenly people go like, someone was watching that.
Yeah, it's the details. It's 100% the details.
Yeah.
Most people in hospitality are very good at the broad strokes, and the great people live in the fine lines. Mm-hmm. And we can feel it, but you also have to be in a place. It's a relationship, right? So you go to have a hospitality experience, and you commit fully to being there. You notice it. You're not on your phone. You're not doing 50 other things, right? Maybe sometimes you are, but maybe in some situations you commit fully to the experience, and energy it cycles between people in this case. Mm-hmm. So you all have to come, and that's really about Julia's Loves in the Details vignette. She essentially talks about it being a relationship, and it goes both ways, and we have to have respect for each other in that environment. And you can only notice all of those things if you are there fully committed to being in the present, and they can only honor you in a way, or you'll only feel it if you're present, and they'll only be able to continue to enforce it if they feel like you get it. It is a relationship. It's a human exchange. You are here, and I have to love you and provide value for you and take care of you, because that's how I feel like I can show love. Hospitality is a vocation. It's not a job. 100% vocation. You are meant to do it, or you're not meant to do it. And you can learn it and you can develop it, but there is an innate feeling that you have to, or set of skills that you have to possess, which is, I am here to make somebody else's life better. And it's not a submissive thing. It's a respect thing. Mm-hmm. It's 100% a respect thing. So, yeah, all of those things really matter. There's so many examples in the stories, and I would encourage people to go down the rabbit hole and discover all these incredible people.
Yeah, and we'll definitely link out to that, and I'll be sure to highlight. I mean, there are many that are good, but like the ones that get my blood pressure going one way or the other, I'll be sure to certainly highlight, because, yeah, it's I'm definitely one of those people who was like just sharing them out, like, you got to look at this one, you got to look at that. So no, and I think this came up when I was talking with your team in advance. So what I found just eerily interesting. So here at Tales this year, speaking of those moments when I'm like, I'm committing to the art and we're going to see what happens.
Yeah.
I have really come to love this format that I've created here, but I've also loved the idea of what happens when you put, like you did, putting 2 good friends together, or even like in this industry, we are talkers and conversers for a living. And what happens when there isn't a host and a guest, but it's just 2 guests? And so I've launched here this like new, like whether it's be a serial or a long-term thing, we'll see. But like I created a new series called So This One Shift, and it's designed to be 2 bartenders, just like what happens after the doors are locked.
Yeah.
What are they? And because they could be bitching about something, or they could be like, "You'll never believe what I." Yeah, it's like I've had 7 groups go so far.
Wonderful.
3 of them never met, and at the end of 30 minutes, I'm like ripping the microphones out of their hand. I'm like,
Yeah.
they're like, "We don't want to stop," and it's cool to feel them being jazzed about talking whatever it is in the industry about them, that it feels edifying to them that they get to meet a new peer in that way.
Yeah, it's lovely. And there's so much knowledge transfer that can happen, right? When you get people to just share all of that information, and also through stories. I think stories are so important. Sean Kenyon was a really impactful. He had a really impactful podcast, Lovers and Details vignette, and he was just talking about, being a kid that was chased home from school, and would go to his father's bar and see the bartenders just be loved. So he wanted to become a bartender because he wanted to receive love, but actually he felt he became a real bartender when he realized that it was about giving love. So, and Josh's story about Don't Postpone Joy, which is so incredible, and we, the pin that you're wearing, we animated obviously the story, and in the story there's all of these pins that show up on the screen, and then we were like, well, what if we made real ones and gave them to him so that he can continue the tradition that his father had started. So I think if you feel love when people notice stuff and they act upon what they see, and that's really all we try to do. But the story form, and like you said, when you get people together, when they start to tell stories to each other, that's where all the richness happens.
It is.
Yeah.
So, just for this, this could go on for forever. This is great. But in the process of, as you figure out how to grow the company too, we started with olives. You've got cherries and margarita mix and bloody. Is it kind of noticing things that you feel like are just still these shitty representations, or how as you slowly decide what to do next, how are you kind of deciding what to add on to the product line?
It's normally about what feels right, and Bloody Mary is a prime example of that. We had no intention of going into that space. We were very happy in the garnish space. More people were using the products. I had a friend that worked at a salsa company about an hour and a half north of Filthy. We were chatting, and he was saying, I'm crushing organic tomatoes. I'm running tomato water down the drains. It's very high in acid. I'm acidifying the Florida water system, and I'm getting fined. And I said, well, how much tomato water are you running down the drains every day? And he said, I don't know, like 15,000 gallons. So I said, well, what else do you put in your salsa? And he's like, fresh horseradish, fresh cilantro. So I went up and saw the process and saw what they were doing. And then it was really about, does Filthy want to be in the Bloody Mary mix space? Because there are hundreds and hundreds of brands. But when we really looked at the brands that are the most popular, they were full of preservatives, additives, allergens. Like in Worcestershire sauce, there's anchovies. So for people that have fish allergens or are vegan, they couldn't have it. They all came in plastic bottles or glass bottles. So it suddenly became really curious to me, does Filthy want to be in the Bloody Mary space, and can we do it in a completely all-natural way, fresh ingredients, so it tastes like you just made it from scratch? And as soon as I knew that we could do that, and it could have a shelf life, we started to go down this mad rabbit hole. And from the idea to completion, it took 5 years.
Jesus.
But within a year of it being launched, partners like Delta and Carnival and Virgin and Marriott and great bars have all embraced it, because premium matters. So I think, to answer your question, we will continue to expand where we feel like we're needed, or where there's an opportunity to give the guest a better experience. So we always say, we make the drinks you love better. So it was always about martinis, because they put gin in our baby bottles when we're kids. So I've been smashing martinis since I was like that big. So that was tiny. So it was martinis with the olives and blue cheese olives and olive brine, because so many people were pouring the brine to make dirty martinis, and it was terrible. So it was an opportunity. Explosion of American whiskey, there were cherries in the space, but they were made for bakers, not bartenders, so they were very sweet, not necessarily complex in flavour. So we could create something that was cooked in copper pots, had much more complexity, more delicate in the skin. So we felt there was an opportunity there.
So to that end, I mean, to the point of how you feel like you've kind of come at this, a lot of the processes used in higher end cherries right now, they started as more of a baking product.
Yeah, when you say higher end cherries, what do you mean?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I'm thinking of, brands like Luxardo and, I mean, Woodford's in the space. They might be sourcing them for all I know. But I just think about, like, it's not hard to spend $18 on cherries right now.
Yeah.
And so I guess when I think of higher end one, I'm thinking of certainly not everybody's beloved neon red. I had a sommelier told me the other day that he went out for what to him felt like a well-executed Manhattan, great vermouth pour, great whiskey, great glass, neon red, cherry went in. But yeah, I was thinking more of cherries like Luxardo and whatnot. And I'm not an expert on them, just thinking of them as what the standard is.
So let's just to talk about red cherries for a second. If I'm going on a cruise ship or I'm by a swimming pool and I'm ordering a pina colada, I want a red cherry with a stem on top.
Sure.
I want to feel like immediately I'm on vacation.
Sure.
So I think it's really about context. American whiskey had an explosion. Audrey Saunders at the Pegu Club in 2007 sort of questioned, well, we're having all of these new expressions of whiskey. Do we really want to put a Shirley Temple style cherry on it? So she embraced Luxardo at the time, is my understanding of it, because it was a much better version in her mind than the fluorescent or neon ones. But to your point, when you have generations and generations making a particular product in a certain way, cocktails are relatively new, and especially the resurgence of American whiskey cocktails. So I think, well, I know, we make everything specifically for cocktails. So there is a complexity, there is a long tart finish that holds up against spirit-forward American whiskey cocktails. So here at Tales, it's the only garnish ever nominated for an award. So, but the palate is so subjective. I encourage people to try different stuff, whatever it is, and just determine what they like, not because they read some review that somebody paid for or some other fucking bullshit. Just try some stuff, taste it, because your palate's, Shauna says it, your palate's different than mine.
Right.
Get whatever you want, but make the decision from a place of being informed, not because you're a fucking sheep. Right?
Yep.
Because you actually tried some stuff and you were like, I really like this and I really love it. Now, at the beginning, you're going to want to read reviews. You don't know, and you're going to want to try some stuff. But don't go around waving a flag if you haven't tried anything else.
Yep.
Right? And I think, just be curious in that sense. There are lots of different cherries out there. There are lots of different Bloody Mary mixes. There are a lot of margarita mixes. Try some stuff. So there's one which is about the palate, and there's two which is the intangible, which is how the brand itself makes you feel. And there's this thing called love marks, which is essentially brands that you love, right? So low love, low respect is a commodity. That's where garnishes were. A fad is something that has high love but low respect. It's like a fidget spinner. It comes, it goes, everybody wants it, and then you don't want to see it again. So low love, low respect, commodity. High love, low respect, fidget spinner, a fad. Okay, this is where it gets complicated. High respect, low love. So that's like your washing powder. It does what it says on the tin, but if another brand's on...
But I have no loyalty to it. I respect what this is doing.
It's going to do what it says it does. But you have no loyalty. If another brand of washing detergent goes on sale, you're going to buy it.
Yep.
Love mark, high love, high respect. My job was to take something that was commoditized, low love, low respect, and become obsessed with making it high love, high respect. That's the journey that we've been on. That's what we do every day.
So I don't necessarily have a ton to baseline it against because I'm not a Bloody Mary person by trade.
Yeah.
I thought your mix was exceptional. So,
Thank you.
But thank you for also talking through Because, a heritage brand like Luxardo might have a wonderful process behind making them, but to your point, were they engineered for it in the first place? And also, to the palate is subjective. You love that in there? Throw that damn...
If that is your love mark,
throw
and
that,
it makes you feel good and you like that brand, go for it.
Throw that damn thing in there.
But if you don't feel anything from it,
right,
and it's like British Airways and Virgin, right?
Yeah. Do you love... The question is, do you love Luxardo as the example, or do you love being able to show people which status is a part of the human game, or do you just love being able to show people that you've got them? And so that's kind of really the question is: are you doing it for the show, or are you doing it because you like it?
Yeah,
so.
I think it's about evolution as well. I think ultimately competitive sets are good because the consumer always wins. If you just have it in that space as an example, for a long time there was one brand, and I don't think that's a good thing. So competition means that people get better value, they get more choice, they get things that work well for them. I really believe in that. Like, I'll do what I do, everybody else will do what they do, and the market will decide.
Sure.
And that's great. That's healthy, right? Everything gets better. When it's just one thing, the quality can go down, but you still don't have a choice.
Is, across your product line, I don't know if there's a great way to answer this, but for the lay person out there, one, tasting, kind of beginning to think about bringing things a little bit to the close. And if there's anything you want to make sure we get in, let me know. But in terms of, tasting is going to be the best way to kind of like understand what you like. But are there any questions you'd be asking it? So you're a consumer and you're standing in an aisle and you're looking at a bunch of olives or cherries or mixes, whatever. Are there questions or things you'd be looking for in terms of signals for integrity, quality, or things that like you might not want to put in your body? Are there any guidelines you?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to say is give yourself what you think you deserve. So everything matters. It really does. We know so many people that buy premium spirits, put it in great glassware. They've got the ice, everything's sort of set, but then they throw some salad olive oil or dessert cherry in it, and you think, but you don't need to do that. Like, just everything should be considered. And I think the second thing is there are brands that grew up in the bars because the bartenders are so conscious of this stuff that if you find brands that are really credible in bars, restaurants and hotels, that's really where you want to start, because they would not be successful in that space and in that universe.
Yeah.
Because that space is the graveyard to 1,000 brands that were full of shit, right? It just is, right? So if you endure and you sustain in an environment that's so highly scrutinized, that's continually evolving, and you're a partner to those people and they love you and they believe in you because they know they trust you and respect the quality, then that's probably a great place to start. So what I would always say is go to your favorite bars and restaurants, talk to the bartender, ask him the ingredients that go into the drink beyond the spirit, and just learn, be curious.
Yeah.
And I think that's a brilliant place to start, and bartenders are at all different levels and all different levels of experience, but if you trust that bartender and you love the way that they make the drink, you know what, just ask them about the ingredients they have.
Yeah, and remember, for a lot of people, it's like you can fixate on the spirit, but what else is going into the glass?
So much stuff.
Yes.
So much stuff. A cocktail's 3 parts, right? It's the spirit, it's something sweet, and it's something tart or bitter. So you have to balance that, right? You have to balance the sweet and the tart, and then you have the spirit on top. So everything should be considered to create a great cocktail. The temperature in which it's served at, the ice that you use for dilution.
Yep.
And you can go all the way down the rabbit hole. But I think, number one, don't worry about judgment. Everybody starts somewhere not knowing everything.
Yep.
And nobody's ever an expert. Everything's constantly evolving. So I would just say, don't be afraid to ask questions. And I think a lot of times people don't want to put themselves in a position where they feel like they might be looked at as being stupid or asking silly questions. I say bollocks to all that. Just ask everything that you think will make you more knowledgeable. So don't worry about asking your bartender a silly question. if they pull a face or they are rude to you, they shouldn't be in hospitality anyway. And that's got nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
But most of the time, the majority of the time, they're going to be incredibly generous, and they're going to tell you all about stuff and why they do stuff, because they're really there to make sure you have a great time. And if that's important to you, they will give you that information.
Yeah.
They will share with you about the measures. And so just ask.
Yeah.
They'll be really kind, I'm sure.
Yeah. Daniel, this has been great. We'll, of course, link out to it, but where do people find Filthy on the internet and all that good stuff? Or you, etc.? Yeah.
Yeah. Filthyfood.com. We have store locators on the site. So let's say you go in and you can just put in your zip code and it'll tell you which store to go to within your area.
Okay.
If it's not in your favorite store, tell them to bring it in. And I think if you really like what we do, then just tell your friends.
Yeah.
That's really it.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. This has been great. Really.
Yeah, such a pleasure.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. The show notes for today's episode are available at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. If you'd like to keep up with what we're working on, there are two great ways to do so. One, our short weekly newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, which you can sign up for at decodingcocktails.com/newsletter. Or give us a follow on Instagram at Decoding Cocktails. If you think this podcast is great stuff, we'd love it if you'd subscribe or, of course, share an episode with a friend. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon, and happy cocktail.